Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, March 27th, 2025, episode 346, and we're going to talk about the selective attention test. So I was at a conference today for Christian schools, and they talked about inclusivity of students with various learning disabilities like autism. And it's a really big issue in Christian schools because they're private schools and they don't have access to the kind of funding that public schools have, where they can have individualized care, specialized care for specific students with needs. They just simply don't have it. Like even in the school where I am now, there's one teacher per grade, and that's it. Very hard to get aides. So, you know, how much time do you have for kids with special needs? So it was kind of interesting. The focus was on inclusion, but not so much education. Right, so you can include students and sort of mainstream them, if you will, into the student body, but just how much education, how much is actually being learned by those students is really wasn't addressed, especially kids with severe mental disabilities. I mean, how much learning is actually going on. I mean, I get the benefits for the child, but as far as education, I'm really, because that is the function of the school. The school is not just a place where you can find friends. You're supposed to be educated there. And so what does it mean for the other kids at the school? Anyway, so that's just a part of the discussion that I had with some of my fellow teachers from my school. But anyway, part of the presentation, I mean, it was, you know, I would say it wasn't bad, but I had still had a lot of questions. But some of the methods, practical methods that they suggested, I've been already doing it, right? So basically, each child is going to be different. And to figure out what exactly is going on with that child, you need to spend a lot of specific time. And at least for my part, I would use all my lunch and recess time to work with kids to try to figure out exactly what was going on. It was a long, slow process, but that pretty much is the only thing you can do. And now, in the aftermath of all the lockdowns, there are a tremendous number of kids who have education issues. They're not all the same, but they are classified all in exactly the same way. In other words, a racial category was created for them, and pretty much everyone who even had the hint of being a little bit different, they were all put in the same category, right? So it's racialization uh, done horribly. I mean, it's just really, really bad. But in one of the presentations, there was a video, and now I'm shifting gears. There was a video that they showed, and it was called the Basketball Awareness Test. At least that's what I looked it up, and I found one that was exactly the one they showed, and it was titled Basketball Awareness Test. It's been around for a while. You might have seen it. I don't want to give it away because once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. But basically, it was a selective attention test. It's really surprising. If you haven't seen it, you should go look it up uh, and you follow along. I mean, you're like, okay, what's going to be done to me? There are many variations of it. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good. But I wonder, right? Because you can only do it once. But I wonder that how all of them are. And the point is of that video, which I won't go into too much detail, is that if you are asked to observe something, you're fixated on that task, on that phenomena that you're observing, to the point that you don't notice other things that are happening at the same time. really significant things, things that should be extremely obvious. They go unnoticed. And so I thought about it, and I actually had a totally different episode, sort of typed up, summarized, general outlined, I should say, outlined. And then I realized, no, you know what? What's actually more interesting is that this is what happens when the government directs our attention to certain issues. At the same time, it is doing other things which are far more significant, far more uh, impactful to the everyday person here in the United States, that it's amazing that more people don't see it. Okay. And so that's what I decided to settle on. So what's hidden in plain sight, right? So the selective attention test kind of reveals how it's so easy to shift our attention and fixate it on something pretty simple, so that this other thing is just happens right in front of our faces and we don't notice it. Uh, just give you a sort of a different perspective on what I mean. If you don't, and I've talked about this early in the channel history, but if you don't have information about something, you don't have information to process what it is that you see, it pretty much is invisible. And I told a story of how I was in Korea. I was looking for a men's bathroom, and I couldn't find one, but there were plenty of bathrooms. And in Korea at the time, this was 30 years ago, they had a lot of unisex bathrooms, which is not unusual, right? A small place, they only have the one bathroom, and so basically everyone uses the same bathroom. So I thought this was a unisex bathroom. I went in, I came out. When I came out, this old lady started laughing at me and, mocking me and saying, "Oh, look at this dude. What's wrong with him? He's used a woman's bathroom." And I tried to defend myself, and I said, "Look, there's nothing here. The universal signs of female bathroom is just weren't there. The little stick figure, not there. F for female, not there. And even the Korean, so ya for short for yoja, right? It's not there." And so I kept saying, this is a unisex bathroom. And so she just kept, and then she started calling over her friends, like, "Look at this ridiculous dude." And then I noticed there was a scribble on the door. And I thought, well, maybe that's something significant. I memorized what it looked like, and I went home and I, wrote it down, and I realized it was Chinese for female. But I didn't learn Chinese by then. And who would have expected that the signs in Korea are all in Chinese? Shouldn't they be in Korean? So that's when I realized if you don't have knowledge of something, it's pretty much invisible to you. And another way of saying it is if you're fixated on the things that that were told to you were important, then you're going to ignore everything else. I also made the leap that scientific experiments, especially the ones that are conducted in a lab, is essentially the same thing. All things being equal, we're going to change one variable, right? Everything is control, and we have one variable. That is so deep, such a huge departure from actual life, right? As soon as one thing changes, everything else around it changes as well. And so scientific experiments, interestingly, teach us to ignore pretty much everything else except for the things which we think are important. And so in life, as we go through society, people are constantly telling us what's important. We got to focus on this issue, right? So what is the most important issue right now? Well, it's subjective, right? So if you got your nose to the grind, then you're thinking about, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to make that mortgage payment? How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to pay my kids' tuition? I mean, there are a lot of things that are really immediate, right? But then if you step back a little bit, is it the military buildup in the Indian Ocean, sort of as a threat to Iran to back off in Yemen, Maybe it's Trump deporting people, potentially innocent people, and then using this deportation mechanism to get rid of enemies of Israel, people who talk smack about Israel. I mean, really, you let Antifa burn down entire cities or, neighborhoods, but now you're going to deport someone for an op-ed they wrote. That's kind of weird. Maybe that's what we should be focusing on, the freedom of speech. Maybe we should focus on Doge and how it seems to be running out of gas. Is it even still going? And I think a lot of people have kind of lost interest in it because they heard that the government is not actually going to cut spending, but spending is going to increase. I thought that's what Doge was all about, cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse. Maybe it's Trump himself. Maybe that's what we have to be focused on, right? And so you can go through a whole list of things that um, are capturing all of our attention, all of our focus, and so we don't see other things that are going on. Maybe it's financial, right? Peter G. Peterson Foundation has an article titled Moody's warns recent policy decisions worsen U.S. fiscal state, maintains negative outlook rating. And I'll read a couple lines from that report. I basically Googled because I heard that Moody's had done this, and this was the first official looking report story on that story. Anyway, so a couple sentences I'll read. Moody's Investor Service continues to warn that the United States is in fiscal deterioration, with a new report warning that government policy decisions in the near term could contribute to higher interest rates and worsening debt for the United States. The two other major credit agencies, Standard and Poor's and Fitch Ratings, have both already downgraded the nation's rating, S&P in 2011 and Fitch in 2023. Now, I remember the 2011 one. I talked about it, how S&P, Standard and Poor's rating system, they downgraded U.S. Treasuries from AAA plus to AAA or AA plus. I forget exactly, but I remember they downgraded it, and it so outraged the Obama administration that they actually punished S&P somehow. I forget how they did it, but they went after this independent ratings agency, how they rated the credit of the United States. And Obama made that speech where he's like, the United States will always pay its bills. It's always AAA plus in my mind, all this crap. And I was like, wow. US is in trouble. So this was after the 2008 crisis. They printed a lot of money to bail out the banks. And so 2011, Standard and Poor's recognizes the obvious, right? The obvious elephant in the room and said, hey, I think they're at risk. And so, but then Moody's, gives a warning most recently. Is it a big deal or not? Well, if you realize that US Treasuries were supposed to be originally as good as gold and backed by the full faith and credit of the United States, right, that always pay their bills. But now we're also looking at $36 trillion in debt, which will never be paid back. And $26 trillion is maturing over the next 4 years. We might be headed into some big problems. So, in other words, if the interest rate on the bonds go up, the ones that they're selling now, in other words, the one they sell bonds in order to basically get other people's money, and so basically they're borrowing other people's money, okay? When the interest rate of the treasuries go up, then the price of the ones that were already sold at a lower interest rate goes down. So the value of them goes down because there's not going to earn as much interest. But the problem is that a lot of businesses, agencies, hedge funds, retirement funds, you name it, insurance companies, they were all required to buy large numbers of treasuries especially when the interest rate was really, really low. And then the interest rate went up to like over 4, maybe nearly 5%, which meant that all of the treasuries that were like sub 1% have lost a tremendous amount of value, except that loss in value is not calculated into the holdings of the people. In other words, the US government passed another law that said, well, if you hold them to maturity, you don't have to mark them to market. In other words, you don't have to revalue them according to their actual market value. You just get to keep their face value on the books. Well, okay, they force people in America to do that. And so basically all the banks are insolvent. But what about other countries? Other countries are like, no, I'm not going to keep with this. And so coincidentally, not only I talked about gold price in episode 339, but recently there was a huge announcement. Um, China insurance funds invest in gold. That was the title of an article. I forgot to write down where I got that. But basically, the Chinese government said that insurance funds, right? So insurance agencies, they need to have invest in something in order for them to be able to pay out the claims that come in, right? So they are allowed now to buy up to 1% in gold. But if you think about it, that's a lot of gold, right? Because uh, the insurance funds are massive, billions and billions of dollars. And so if 1% can now be used to purchase gold, it's going to affect the gold price, right? And today it closed at $3,061 per ounce. And then there's a story from Goldman Sachs where they have a financial outlook and they make predictions on where prices are going to be at the end of the year. They revised their end of the year gold price from 3,100 to 3,300. And they're generally very, very conservative, right? So they lowball these prices so as to stay on the safe side, but also not to breathe panic into the markets. But in the article, apparently, according to Vince Lancy, um, where he did an article, he did a video today, uh, and he has a Substack, I guess it's called Gold Fix. In that report, Goldman talks about $4,500 gold in an extreme tail scenario. In other words, uh, gold price could be, so they said it'll go to 3,300, right? And which is not that far from where we are now. But then they say it might go to 4,200 by the end of the year and 4,500 in 12 months. And Vince Lancy goes into that in that video talk titled Goldman Talks About 4,500 Gold in Extreme Tail Scenario. Vince is very technical. I don't understand all of it, but I just keep listening to it because eventually I'm going to learn more and more. And he has been talking about the silver squeeze. Lots of people have been talking about the silver squeeze. The PSLV shorts have gone through the roof, but that is so that people don't take physical delivery. And basically, what he's saying is that there is no so there is basically it's a what do you call that a shell game being played with gold and silver, and but now so many people have taken the physical out that now there's a physical shortage, and it's acute in silver, and so people are trying to prevent people from taking physical delivery of silver. And if it does happen, I don't know, something apparently it's a big deal. And is that what is being, you know, we are being distracted from not seeing, right? Because this is the very currency that we use, and the dollar being the global reserve currency, a big shakeup in the dollar, the perception of the dollar, the value of the dollar, the use of the dollar, that will be huge. And if the dollar does collapse, then all of this adventurism that we're doing in the Indian Ocean, with Yemen, with Israel, with Ukraine, all of that ends. Can you imagine that? That would be pretty crazy. And all of this is because the government is doing military buildup in India, giving all this money to Ukraine, to Israel, bombing every country that you can think of. I mean, that is so basically it's this vicious cycle. And I just thought it was kind of interesting, um, the selective attention test phenomena that the US government is constantly practicing that on us. So look here, be outraged about this while we do this. And it seems to me that this is something that all of us will become aware of quite soon. Like if the silver squeeze does happen, people say that the price is going to just go through the roof. People say, right? I'm just sharing what I heard, right? Is not recommending anything. But, what is in store for all of us, I just don't know. And what is that event, that phenomena that the government doesn't want us to see, to fixate on? Maybe it's what is it, the CBDC, central bank digital currency. I mean, there are so many different things going on. It's hard to keep track of everything. But yeah, that was just an observation I made today. This selective attention test and how living in America, it seems that we're living through a selective attention test. So, what is actually important? What is something that we are being distracted from seeing? What should we notice? And then how should we respond? What should our response be? So many questions, very few answers. And so all we can do is default to the basic principles of responsibility and thinking about the consequences of every choice that we make and what would be the worst case scenario, what would be the best case scenario. And what I always do, which is what I shared not that long ago, I always hope for the best, but always prepare for the worst. And so if something in the middle happens, I'm all right. I I'm ready for it. But my whole thing now is, do I even know what the worst case scenario would be? And hopefully this is nothing. This is just simply a subjective musing, conjecture, speculation, and none of this will happen. Well, that's it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time.